did they, Nigel Nelson?
Well, the people on the ground did a fantastic job. There's no question about it. The people back at the Foreign Office was quite clear at the time they didn't do such a good job. My wife was working on trying to get Afghan refugees back into this country and dealing with the Foreign Office. And it was complete chaos. I mean, it's perfectly true. Emails weren't being read. The idea that people were working from home and that was a problem, it shouldn't have been. She was working from home and she was processing the paperwork to get it through. I think overall, the biggest problem really is that we don't commit ourselves enough when we go in and smash someone else's country up. We could argue we shouldn't do it in the first place, but having gone there, what we should have done is say, right, we're here for the long haul. We will commit to whatever it takes. Now, 20 years clearly wasn't enough in Afghanistan because we ended up right back at square one. And if we'd stayed put, that evacuation wouldn't have been necessary, and we could have had a more controlled withdrawal of people to get them out, get them settled in Britain, the ones who helped America over there, and so on. And you wouldn't have had the chaos you see now.
I do just want, before I bring the rest of the panel in, just to give some context here to what other countries did. For example, this is according to various statements and press releases. If I look, for example, say Germany, they managed to get out about 5,300. Italy, more than 5,000. Canada, more than 3,700. And France, around 3,000. As I just mentioned, 15,000 we managed in about 2 weeks. Now, Joanna, I've read in detail, there's about 40 pages from this whistleblower, all the different reports. And, you know, it's quite damning, actually, when you sit and you look at it, particularly when you reflect on just how many senior people were on holiday at the same time. However, there's a part of me that kind of thinks, oh, come on. Everybody was trying their best, surely. The fact that we got such high numbers out should be commended in some cases. Of course, you know, there are people that very tragically we didn't manage to get out. But there are many people also that will watch this and say, you know, it was a very tricky situation and the best was done.
I mean, it certainly was a tricky situation, but it was also, by all accounts, absolute chaos. I think you're right. What the report today shows is damning, but sadly, it's not surprising. We knew that Dominic Raab and other key officials had decided to take long holidays. I don't think if you really knew what was going on the ground, it's not good enough just to say, oh, well, it all happened a bit more quickly than we were expecting. It's their job to know these things, and they should have been able to predict. And yet, working from home's one thing, but just being on holiday, I don't think that's good enough when you're in charge of kind of global crises like this.
So they're not allowed to go on holiday if you're in charge of global crises, or that a global crisis might erupt at any given time. Does that mean no one gets holiday?
But something like this evacuation of Afghanistan, you know, we did know the date that the American troops were going to withdraw. That had been announced. This wasn't entirely unpredictable. And actually, you know, call me hard, call me a horrible person, but I do think if you've got major responsibilities for people's lives at the end of the day, no, frankly, it's not good enough just to say you're on holiday. You know, people do cut holidays short at all times. Now, that's sad. That's unfortunate for people and their families. You know, maybe I'm being very, very hard about this, but actually, I think when you're talking about people's lives, when you're talking about major international crises, just saying, well, I'm on holiday and my holiday is important is not good enough, quite frankly. My concern is that this does speak to a much deeper malaise within the civil service, that there has been this attitude of, well, I'll count down my hours, I'll stick to my job description. Working from home means I can get my Peloton and I can get on my exercise bike in between meetings. And actually, these people are running the country. They're responsible for people's lives, not just in Afghanistan, but more fundamentally here at home as well. And it's not good enough for them to have this kind of clock-watching attitude. In the past, there was an attitude of public service, of a clues in the name. This is the civil service. They are civil servants. Now, it's not to say they shouldn't be rewarded. It's not to say they shouldn't have holidays. But I think we've lost this sense of public duty.
Peter?
Michelle, it was foreseeable. That's the key thing.
What was foreseeable?
That there was going to be massive pressure on the brave staff on the ground and on Whitehall whenever the evacuation happened. And Joe Biden, US President, had given a date for that. This was avoidable. There's an inquiry going on with a common select committee. We need to wait for the result for that. But if even part of what the whistleblower says is true, then it amounts to a practical, political, and I would say moral failure as well. And the government will never admit this, but we all know that soon afterwards, Boris Johnson sacked his Foreign Secretary for incompetence.
But do you honestly believe, I mean, we was reporting in-depthly on that whole kind of Afghanistan situation, and it did evolve at rapid speed. You know, of course, you can say that there was a timetabled removal from Afghanistan, but there is surely no denying as well the speed at which the Taliban took control, save Kabul. I think it even surprised the Taliban.
That is the nature of wars and their aftermath. And remember, this is not me or you organising it. The Foreign Office, the Foreign Affairs specialists, it's their job to know about this, with centuries of expertise between them. And there's a political failure. Before, I've hardly even touched on the holidays or work from home. Clearly, we're under a pandemic and people have to be mindful of restrictions. But when you hear about 5% of the required number actually evacuated, about 8 soldiers sharing a single computer, this is a political and moral failure.
Well,
and that's why Dominic Raab was sacked.
People, I mean, you say it's a political failure, this evacuation. Most people would say it was a political failure going in there in the first place, and would have hoped and much preferred that our politicians had stayed away from all of these foreign wars in the first place instead of putting us into that. But Nigel, to Peter's point, where Peter is basically saying that this was predictable and that the government should have seen this coming, do you share that sentiment?
Yes, I do, totally. It was predictable.
The speed at which the Taliban took, for example, Kabul.
I think probably the speed of it did take people by surprise, but the fact that Taliban were going to take over wasn't a surprise. So you were leaving Afghanistan at a time where the Taliban was still strong, where the government was weak, where you couldn't guarantee that the Afghan army could be in control. So all those things in the mix.
But the Afghan army just pretty much ran away.
Well, that's what I mean. And so the only way that these things can be done properly is if you actually commit to make sure you don't leave a country until you know that the political structures and the military structures are in place and strong enough to hold the place. That wasn't the situation in Afghanistan. As I say, there is a big question about, do you go in the first place?
Well, not a question to me. The answer to me would be absolutely not. That's not a question in my mind. I think it was the wrong decision, but alas, we are
Michelle,
where we are.
It happened, and if you invade somewhere, then there's always eventually going to be a withdrawal, whether that's days or decades later.
No, I know, but I know, but my point is I just always find it a bit rich when people on the Labour side of the fence sit there saying this is a political failure, when to me the political failure was in the first instance getting us into that situation. But
absolutely, no, I agree with you completely. But I think once we have got in there, which I think we shouldn't have done, but once we're in there, then I think we do have a responsibility. And I think these aren't just kind of your refugees, like people who are turning up now in Calais trying to come across in boats to Dover. You know, these were people who really played a role as translators and worked for the English forces over there. So we did have a duty towards helping them get them out. And I think, you know, clearly people were surprised at the speed with which the Taliban took over. You know, that's absolutely true. People were surprised. But I think another political failure is the very fact that they were surprised, because if you were paying attention to what was going on, if you did look at the power of the Taliban and the weakness of the forces that the British soldiers had been responsible for helping train up, you know, they shouldn't have been surprised. So I think the surprise in and of itself is another level of the failure of the Foreign Office in this instance.
So remember, Michelle, very quickly, that in 2001, the invasion was backed by the bipartisan United Nations.
Nigel, in terms of specifically one of the allegations that this whistleblower has made, is he's saying that the work-life balance of the civil servants basically took priority. These people didn't want to work evenings, didn't want to work weekends, wanted to stick to their 8 hours a day, and basically, I would say, didn't step up in the event of an emergency.
Well, that's the kind of thing that completely surprises me. I've been working with the civil service for the last 30-odd years, and I do not find them like that. I find them dedicated, hard-working, prepared to put the hours in, and especially during a crisis, absolutely dedicated. So that part I don't recognise.
Well, there you go. Are you a civil servant, by the way? And if you are, do you agree with Nigel? Are you willing to step up and go the extra mile? Or do you sit there and go, hang on a second, no, I work essentially Monday to Friday, 9 to 5, and that'll do me? Thank you very much. Get in touch and let me know your thoughts. Going to take a quick break. When we come back, I'm very excited to talk to this chap, James Timpson, OBE nonetheless, Chief Exec of Timpson. And I have to say, fantastic organisation, doing fantastic things, and a company that puts purpose before profit. And I can tell you, there's not many of those. I'll have that and more after the break.
On Brazier at 8, swimming legend Sharon Davis joins me to talk about who wins and loses when a nation boycotts the Olympics. As the Pope compares the EU to a totalitarian regime, why is the Vatican struggling to forgive Brussels? Also, Frank Furedi on why lives were lost in Kabul because Foreign Office civil servants were working from home. All that plus the wonderful side effects of Viagra. That's Brazier from 8.
You're watching GB News live across the UK and the world on our digital stream.
GB News is Britain's news channel.
We are the UK's home of discussion and debate from all perspectives.
We are here for you. Don't forget to join our YouTube community by clicking on that subscribe button.
And if you want the GB News app, you can click and catch up on programmes anytime.
We love to hear from you, so email us.
gbviews@gbnews.uk.
Thanks for being part of the GB News family.
My name is Andrew Doyle. Join me every Sunday evening at 7 p.m. for Free Speech Nation. This is a show where we address current affairs and news stories of the week with the help of two wonderful comedian panellists. I brought in comics because I want to give it a lighter edge, and also they work for less. See you there.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday, and there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
I'm Colin Brazier. I've reported from more than 70 countries around the world, covered wars from Afghanistan to Iraq, from Lebanon to the Balkans. I'm trying to bring that experience, that feel for events, to the studio. And something else, I'm ready to give an opinion. Today's stories with a spark. Brazier from 8 p.m. weekdays on GB News.
Hello there and welcome back to Dewbs and Co. Now, it might not have escaped your notice, but there's been a pandemic. Some would say we're still in it. And of course, it's impacted pretty much all of us. And when it comes to business, it's safe to say that many a business has been hit hard. Some have even closed their doors forever as a result. But one that has not just survived, but has thrived is one which will be familiar to many of us, the Timpson Group. It has brands like Timpson Shoe Repairs, Max Spielman, Snappy Snaps and Johnson Cleaners to name but a few. They are a company who pride themselves on being a business with purpose and of giving people a second chance at life, and one that treats their employees literally like family. Joining us now is the Chief Exec, James Timpson. Good evening to you, James.
Good evening, and thanks for having me on today.
No problem. James, I tell you, I've been a massive fan of your organisation for quite some time. I became familiar with you when I used to do employment roadshows where we was going out into different cities trying to get people back into work. And it was there, I guess, that I became familiar with your business ethos, your culture, if you like. And I found it absolutely fascinating, if you will. Just tell us a little bit about what makes you different to other organisations.
Well, in some ways, we do things like the same as everyone else, which is we try and do a really good job and give really good customer service. But I think we do it in a different way to many others. It helps that we're a family business and we treat everybody who works in the business as one of the family. So all of our 4,500 colleagues are part of my family. And we run the business through the principles of trust and kindness. So we trust everyone to do an amazing job. So we only have two rules, which is you put the money in the till and you look the part. So that's why when you go into our shops, they sort of feel like franchise shops because the colleagues can do whatever they want. And the other is we believe in a culture of kindness. So it's our job to make sure that our colleagues work in an environment that everyone is kind to them and they can then be kind to our customers. So that means that we help people when they're having a difficult time. We reward them for doing an amazing job financially, but actually it's not just about money, it's about all the other things you can do to say thank you and support people. Because lives are difficult and not straightforward, whether it's through bereavement, debt, addiction problems. It's our job as a company to help our colleagues as part of our family through the difficult times too. So it's a different way of doing things, but I'm a big believer that if you really trust everybody and you're kind to everybody, somehow you end up sort of doing okay and surviving financially. So that's really, really how it works.
Prisons, of course, have been in the press a lot today as well. We're talking again about prison reforms. But one of the things I find fascinating about the Timpson Group is for people with criminal records, of which, by the way, there's about 11 million people in this country that have a criminal record. Often, employers will look the other way and absolutely not consider employing those people. But you yourselves, you have a completely different view, don't you? Not only are you open-minded to employing people with a criminal record, ex-offenders, you proactively go into prisons, you have academies there, you go out and you'll meet people when they're coming out of their prison sentences to get them into your organisations, help them with housing. Tell us more.
So it all started about 19 years ago because I was invited into a local prison near to where I live in Warrington. And there was a young guy showing me around, a young inmate, he was 19 years old. And I thought he was brilliant. His personality was fantastic. And in our business, we just recruit people on personality. So for us, CVs are a waste of time. We just want their name and phone number because we're looking for this thing called personality. And this young guy, Matthew, was showing me around. So I slipped in my business card and said, listen, I'll give you a second chance because he was really worried about getting a job. Took him on. He's still with us today. So I thought, well, let's see if we can help some more people. So then when I got up to about sort of 10 or 15 people, ex-offenders from prison I'd met and recruited, I told everyone in the business what we were doing. And I think because I managed to find people who were really good, my colleagues said, amazing, let's go and get some more. So that's when we sort of really started on the journey of opening up training academies in prisons as well, so we can give people the skills and the confidence so when they leave prison, they can just walk into a job with us. Because if you're a customer going into one of our shops, you don't really care what someone's background is. You want to be served by someone who's polite, who technically does a really good job, and is friendly and honest and kind. That's what you want. And it's amazing how we managed to find all those people in prison, to the extent now that 1 in 10 of my colleagues are people who we first met in prison, people with lived experience of prison, as it's called nowadays. And what started off as just trying to help people has become a really important part of our recruitment. And bizarrely, when we first started, I didn't really think about what the perception would be. We're a business that we cut keys and we employ some burglars and some people who've done armed robbery and things like that, which you would think is the most ridiculous thing to do. But actually, I think our customers understand what we're trying to do and the fact that by giving people a second chance, we can help society too by reducing reoffending. So bizarrely, also what's happened now, because of COVID and the recruitment difficulties that loads of businesses face, including our own, that one of the problems in the past was the fact we didn't have enough people offering jobs to people leaving prison. Now the reverse is true, where we used to go into a prison and we were the only employer that had been there for weeks or months on end. Now employers are queuing up at lots of prisons, trying to recruit people to work in hospitality, construction, distribution, HGV drivers and so on. So I think the sentiment in the country is changing. But for us as a business, we've just managed to find loads of amazing people who have failed society. But often when you start digging, society has failed them too. We've also learned how to do it. So we don't recruit sex offenders. We don't recruit people who've got health problems that having a full-time job with us would actually be a disaster for them. And we don't recruit people who don't want to work. So I would say, out of the people leaving prison today, there's about 20% of those individuals we would be interested in interviewing who may want to come and work for us or other people. But I think one of the other things to remember is that in all businesses of scale, we're all employing people who've been to prison, but most companies don't know it because people have lied in their application form. For us, we want people to be honest, and we judge them by their personality, not on what they've done. And it's actually meant that we've had amazingly talented people, very, very bright, dedicated, passionate people who've joined us, who we'd never have met before if we turned them down because of a criminal record. And it's actually got to the stage now where quite a lot of our senior colleagues are people who joined us from prison, 5-10 years ago, and have risen through the ranks and are doing really, really well. So it's a combination of commercially, although this was never the intention, it's become a really positive thing for us to do because we're recruiting talented people from prison. But also, it's a great thing to do to help people turn their lives around too.
Yeah, and James, it's fantastic hearing your attitude towards ex-offenders, but there are sadly many companies that don't share your attitude. So what advice would you give to any viewers that have got a criminal record that perhaps maybe haven't disclosed it or don't know whether to disclose it, but they work for an organisation that is perhaps not as understanding as yours?
I think that's a really good question, because there will be people listening who are working for companies where they've essentially lied in their application forms and they're always worried about getting found out. I mean, when we first started doing this, when I told everybody in the business we were employing people from prison now, a number of colleagues, some senior colleagues, actually came forward to say, I'm really pleased you're doing this now, because when I was younger, I got into trouble, did a few silly things, and I've had to lie on my application form. So my message to those people is the world has changed now. The whole environment for employment has changed. So the thing for you to do is either to go forward to your HR team to say, listen, I want to have an honest conversation with you off the record. Or the second thing is, if you don't think your current employer is going to be open-minded to retain the talented people that they have, including yourselves, then to go to those companies that do. There are many, many companies now that have opened their arms to employ people from prison. If you go on the Employers Forum for Reducing Reoffending website, there's Bridges of Hope website, there's a number of sites that specialise in helping people who have various challenges get into work. So 10 years ago it would have been very difficult, but I think now the opportunities are there for people, so I would advise them to really go for it. But also, I think sentiment has changed, and hopefully the companies they're currently with will understand the situation you're in and keep you and promote you and support you.
Yeah, James, I mean, I could talk to you for much longer, but I know that sadly time is against us. I know also your organisation, your group has so many fantastic charitable endeavours as well. The Alex Timpson Trust, for example, that focuses on looked after children, and you do such good work. I've had so many viewers whilst I've been talking to you, getting in touch, saying that they are customers of yours, that they too have huge amounts of respect for all the work that you're doing, and that you're a benchmark indeed for other organisations. I know, James, that you are a family organisation. Just before I let you go, I read an interview from earlier this year where your dad, John, said the following: I used to love taking James fishing when he was a kid, but he never once caught a fish. I can't let you go without asking you, are you better at fishing these days?
No, still terrible. And bizarrely, I've got a thing, I'm so bad at it, I can't even touch fish, but I've always been fascinated and I like watching these fishing programmes and stuff like that. So no, still a lot of work to do.
Oh, well, there you go. Must try harder. James Timpson, enjoyed our chat. Thank you very much, and do keep up all the good work. Lots of you getting in touch about Timpsons. I've got an absolute, you can probably tell, I've got an absolute soft spot for Timpsons, because I personally don't believe, or should I say, I do strongly believe that your biography doesn't equal your destiny. Lots of us have very hard times in our upbringings and in our early adulthood, but that shouldn't shape what can become of us. So any organisations like Timpson that are supporting people, get the thumbs up from me. Anyway, we're going to take a quick break. When we come back, the pandemic, it seems to have affected children in the north more than the south, as it deepened the north-south divide. And the Pope has compared the EU to a dictatorship for a language guide that they've issued, apparently saying that you shouldn't call Christmas Christmas, you should call it the holidays instead. That and more coming up after the break. Don't go away.
It's time to remind ourselves, there's always another winter. Canary Islands sponsors the weather.
Hello again. The worst of Storm Barrow's weather is now easing, but the weather stays unsettled during the next 24 hours with further rain or showers and continued gusty winds in many places. You can see Storm Barrow, a dartboard area of low pressure which deepened rapidly as it made its way across the Atlantic on Monday and the start of Tuesday, now slowing down and gradually filling, so the worst of its impacts will come down in the next 24 hours, but still the potential for some very unsettled weather overnight. Through the evening, 70 to 80 mile per hour wind gusts possible for parts of Wales and to the Bristol Channel as well. Stays windy in the northeast as well, and showers wrapped around that area of low pressure or longer spells of rain with further hill snow for northern England as well as Scotland. So we start off Wednesday very unsettled with that low still in place. The winds will be coming down through the day, but it's going to take a while, so still the potential for gales for South Wales and southwest England, 65 mile per hour wind gusts. And for northeast Scotland, Northern Ireland, parts of western England and Wales, a continuous feed of showers through the day. The weather stays unsettled in many spots. Some drier and brighter interludes towards the east of England, western Scotland, for example. However, all in all, it's an unsettled day. Expect showers, expect gusty winds, and it will feel cool or cold with all of that weather going on. Into Wednesday evening and overnight, we're going to see further showers coming in from that area of low pressure, especially in the east and northeast, and a few coming through to western England, Wales and Northern Ireland. A lot of cloud cover, and with that breeze, temperatures generally holding up overnight, but potential for a chilly start for western Scotland, perhaps one or two spots further south as well. A bright start in these areas, a better chance of sunshine coming through on Thursday morning, and showers gradually easing through the day in many spots. But further rain arrives in the far west towards the end of Thursday. That makes its way across the country on Friday, followed by showers. More rain to come on Saturday.
Canary Islands sponsors the weather.
Coming up on Dan Wootton tonight, is the Conservative Party in danger of crumbling as Boris Johnson loses right-wingers to Reclaim and Reform? GB News star and former Reform leader Nigel Farage gives his take in What the Farage? Has the outrageous Northern blackout exposed the government's levelling up pledge as a load of baloney? Darren Grimes sounds off in The Outsider. Plus, you'll get to voice your opinion in The Clash, and I'll break down the day's top stories with my superstar panel. The author and journalist Rebecca Reed, the Conservative commentator Calvin Robinson, and the Daily Star columnist Dawn Neeson. That's Dan Wootton tonight, Monday to Thursday from 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. on GB News.
You're watching GB News live across the UK and the world on our digital stream.
GB News is Britain's news channel.
We are the UK's home of discussion and debate from all perspectives.
We are here for you. Don't forget to join our YouTube community by clicking on that subscribe button.
And if you want the GB News app, you can click and catch up on programmes anytime.
We love to hear from you, so email us.
gbviews@gbnews.uk.
Thanks for being part of the GB News family.
My name is Andrew Doyle. Join me every Sunday evening at 7 p.m. for Free Speech Nation. This is a show where we address current affairs and news stories of the week with the help of two wonderful comedian panellists. I brought in comics because I want to give it a lighter edge, and also they work for less. See you there.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday, and there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
I'm Colin Brazier. I've reported from more than 70 countries around the world, covered wars from Afghanistan to Iraq, from Lebanon to the Balkans. I'm trying to bring that experience, that feel for events, to the studio. And something else. I'm ready to give an opinion. Today's stories with a spark. Brazier from 8 p.m. weekdays on GB News.
Hello there, welcome back. Lots of you getting in touch. Donald has been in contact about Afghanistan, saying, I'm a former civil servant, now retired, and it's written in the contract that in times of emergency you will work as and when required. He goes on to say, if civil servants refuse to work overtime, in his view, that they should be sacked straight away. Brian has said the UK has taken 3 times more people from Afghanistan than any other EU country, the ones in France and Italy, for example. Lots of you divided opinion. George says the Afghan whistleblower only told us what we already knew. Lots of you getting in contact as well about the interview with James Timpson there. As I said, I just absolutely adore that organisation and what they do. So many of you are supporting that view as well, saying that, you know, you respect Timpson and that you would hope that other organisations would follow suit. I've got to also say, though, Philip has been in contact and said Timpsons are rewarding the criminal fraternity as against giving jobs out to out-of-work people who haven't committed any illegal acts. I've got to say, I've got to pull you up on that there, Phil. You know, they don't give these people jobs at the expense of others. 10% of their workforce are from the ex-offenders. And I just think, you know, we should all be in a situation when people go in prison and then seem to perpetually reoffend. That's no good for anybody. So we should all want people to be given those second opportunities, to be put on the straight and narrow, because I do also think that none of us, you know the twists and turns that our lives are going to take. We can have a curveball tomorrow, and it's so quick how these things happen. You lose your job, you tend to drink, you lose your wife, and down and down and down it goes. And none of us know where we might end up. So we should all support, in my view anyway, those organisations and those people that support people when life hasn't gone how it might have wanted it to go. Anyway, let's move on. A new report has warned that the pandemic has hit children in the north of England the hardest, with health and educational outcomes worse than youngsters elsewhere. The Child of the North study shows that kids are more likely to be obese, for example, in the north of England than a child elsewhere in England. They have a 27% chance of living in poverty compared to just 20% in the rest of England, and are more likely to die under the age of 1. I mean, that stat is absolutely shocking. And the report estimates that when they grow up, they will lose an estimated 24.6 billion in combined wages over lifetime earnings. Academics have argued that the pandemic has made these inequalities worse, basically, with the report estimating that children in the north have missed more schooling in lockdown than their peers elsewhere in England. Joanne, I mean, we talk about this north-south divide a lot. We talk about levelling up a lot. You know, this pandemic has come along and almost given a hammer blow and widened those inequalities, hasn't it?
Absolutely. And do you know what, Michelle, this makes me so angry, because it's yet another thing that was just completely predictable. The moment lockdown was announced, it was very obvious that if you had a nice big house with a lovely big garden, you had the kind of job that was well paid and you could work from home, you would probably be all right. But if you had an insecure job in a sector where you were furloughed, you potentially lose your job,
contract,
0 hours contract. If you were struggling with 3 children on a low income in a high-rise block of flats, you were not going to have a nice experience in lockdown. Now, children also have suffered more than anybody else, and completely out of all proportion to the extent to which coronavirus actually has an impact upon them health-wise. They've had to bear the sacrifices for adults, for older people. Personally, I think shutting down schools was an absolutely immoral act. There was no justification for it whatsoever. There was no health justification for keeping children out of school. Teachers have not been ill, teachers have not died, teachers have not been hospitalised at a greater rate than other people in the population. There was absolutely no justification for it. And now, with things like this report and the 100,000 children who were described in Parliament yesterday as ghost children, children who have disappeared from the education system altogether, who knows what has happened to these children? You know, we're now seeing the terrible consequences, but this was predictable. In March last year, I wrote saying it was a bad idea to close schools, that there would be these terrible consequences. And do you know what? I received emails from people telling me they wished I would die, they wished I would catch cancer, they wished I would catch COVID, and they wished I would die because they disagreed with me saying that schools should stay open. Now, I think I hate to say it, but I think I've been proved right. I think we are seeing now the terrible consequences, the educational inequality, the mental health problems, the economic problems, which will come further down the line, the lack of social mobility, health problems, all of these things which are stemming from the fact that we made this decision to shut schools, and we had politicians and journalists agitating for this, standing up in the press conferences that Boris Johnson held, arguing for schools to be closed. And I think it was deeply immoral, grossly irresponsible. And I think people who were there advocating for lockdown, advocating for schools to be closed, need to hang their heads in shame.
Peter?
I don't want to have another row about lockdown. The report was about inequality and the impact of the pandemic. And I lived in Yorkshire and in Cumbria for a long time, although I now live in one of the poorest parts of London. And I think what we know and what you said earlier is, of course, there's huge amounts of inequality around the UK. And we know that when there's a crisis, whether it's a social crisis or a health crisis or an economic crisis, the pandemic has been all of those, then people in poorer households are worse hit. We've now got a levelling up strategy, allegedly, 11 years into a Conservative government. I don't want to get too much into party politics, but crises hit poorest people. And there was this brief interlude at the start of the pandemic, start of first lockdown, when a few deluded politicians said, lockdown's been a great leveller. Of course it hasn't been, hasn't it? If you live in a large house with a garden, with clean air and lots of food, and I wouldn't decry these people, they may work hard and have earned it, but to suggest for a moment that lockdown is a leveller is beyond nonsense.
Nigel?
I think what they need to do is actually change the national funding formula, which is the way that we pay for schools. So it averages about £5,100 per child, allocated to different local authorities by central government, who then distribute it. Different schools get different amounts depending on their need. It seems to me that because of things like this, we've actually got to make sure the money is going where it's most needed. And if you need to top that up with pupil premium for disadvantaged children, the same thing applies.
But you can have all the funding in the world, but if the school's shut, then it's irrelevant.
Yeah, I mean, but you're now talking about the pandemic. I'm talking about the schools now being open. And these are the kids who are suffering. I mean, for instance, one of the levelling up things that the report talks about is universal free school meals. Great idea. Let's level up everybody so everyone gets the nutrition they need when they go into school. So things like that can be done. But at the moment, the funding is important in the sense that too much goes to schools which have got plenty and not enough to those who have not got enough.
I think the focus on here, the focus on funding is a complete red herring. I mean, you know, if you make universal free school meals, it helps me. You know, I can afford, quite frankly, to pay for my daughter's school lunches. I don't need that extra help, which is great for me. But I think, you know, money is not the problem at this point in time. I think Michelle's absolutely right. We need to keep schools open. That's got to be the first thing. There needs to be a real pledge that from now on, we will not, no matter what the scale of the emergency or the health crisis, the first priority is to keep schools open. At all costs, we keep schools open. My fear is with the Omicron is we're already heading in this direction of another pandemic where we start sending children home. And the reason why the Northeast was hit hardest and children in the Northeast were hit hardest was not because of the national lockdowns, which affected everybody equally, but because bubbles and cohorts and whole schools decided to send children home following the impact of one or two cases within a class. And that this is ridiculous. There's no evidence that this is having a serious health effect on children.
I'm sorry for diving in, but it's bigger than lockdown. We've had 1,000 years of inequality in this country. It's more than about 18 months of lockdown. 1,000 years of inequality.
Which has been massively exacerbated by lockdown. And actually under Gove's reforms, Michael Gove's reforms to the education system, we were, prior to the pandemic, just beginning to get into a situation where we were having greater educational equality. And the fact is 18 months of school closures through lockdown, through pandemics, through sending cohorts of children home, completely undid all of that progress.
Michael Gove was sacked for incompetence, by the way.
Well, what do you think? I mean, a lot of that conversation there focused on the lockdowns of schools in particular. And I have to say, How can you get people up to speed with their education if the schools are closed? Parker's got in touch saying free school meals, as usual. The left wing on your panel want everything to be free for everybody. And some would say, Nigel, that the feeding of children is the parents' responsibility.
What if the children aren't being fed by the parents?
Well,
to give them an equal chance. That
why would a parent not feed their child?
A lot of parents don't. Some of them
it happens, doesn't it?
It does
Nigel's
happen.
reckoning with reality.
And you've got, I've known head teachers who go in and make sure.
But why would? I mean, you say because they're drug addicts. Well, I would say
I'm giving an example.
No, but I would say
if
a parent chooses not to feed their kid because they are a drug addict, well, I'm sorry, that child has no business being with that parent. That parent has no business being with that child, and that child should be out of there.
Those things are commonless. I've worked in a primary school where some of the kids came to school without having breakfast. The head teacher made it his business to make sure they started the day properly with a nutritional meal.
I think schools need to focus on education, not feeding children.
Well, they can't learn anything if they're hungry.
Well,
exactly, they go together. I think that's an unnecessarily hardline stance. Well, let's not bother about food. Let's educate children. They go together.
No one's saying let's not bother about school. There's a conversation. I tell you what, as well, this conversation can and would rumble on and on. But I want to talk about Pope Francis as well. Do get in touch though with your thoughts about that school meal, because it is a topic that divides many. Of course, any sane-minded individual would not think that any child should go hungry. That would just be an awful suggestion. But where does that responsibility lie? Is it the parents' responsibility to feed their kids? And what if they decide for whatever reason that they don't want to do that? Should it be the state then that steps up to do that basic parenting? Get in touch and let me know. But let's move on. Pope Francis has compared the EU to a Nazi dictatorship after introducing an inclusive language guide, which has now been withdrawn. The guide banned the use of words and phrases such as man-made and recommended instead a more inclusive alternative, such as human-induced. The word Christmas was to be replaced with holidays too, which sparked the Pope to compare the language censorship to that of the dictatorships. What do you reckon to all this? Is the Pope right? Should we all be using more inclusive language or what? What's going on, Peter?
Well, I think that Pope Francis drew a parallel at Christmas. In this, there's a similarity with a story you get in Britain every single year in a newspaper which says a local government has banned the word Christmas. And living in East London, as I do, in a very diverse community, I know that Muslim people are not offended by the word Christmas, just like I'm not offended by Eid Mubarak and so on and so on. And I think Pope Francis did use extremely strong language, but I think I see where he's coming from, because we all agree, let's cut to the chase, we all agree that using the word Christmas isn't offensive. But Pope Francis had a slightly broader point, which has maybe been lost, that repressive governments start by manipulating language.
I think he's also got a point, actually, when he compares the EU to a dictatorship. I mean, I wouldn't make Nazi comparisons myself, but I would definitely point out the fact that the EU is a fundamentally anti-democratic institution. Its very intention is to keep democracy and decision-making away from national populations and to centralise them in Brussels or in Strasbourg. And I think what you see with these language guides is exactly what happens when you become so distanced from normal, ordinary people and the way that normal, ordinary people speak, that you've completely lost the plot. And it just shows, A, what's good about democracy. It keeps politicians in touch with what people think, and B, the consequences of operating in an anti-democratic, dictatorial fashion, as the EU is wont to do.
A bit Brexity here, but I mean, what the Pope was saying was, the dictatorial side was that he was arguing that Europe loses its national identity within countries because of the EU. Well, it doesn't. It's perfectly true that the EU, that we are no longer a part of, will head more and more towards federalism, to becoming a United States. But that doesn't mean that someone can't be French and European. any more than it means that someone can't be Texan and American. So national identity should not be lost because of the EU.
The EU is fundamentally hostile, Nigel, if not to national identity, then to national sovereignty. And for many people, national identity...
Sovereignty is a different thing.
For many people, Nigel, sovereignty and identity are linked. And the fact of being a citizen of a country means that you get to vote in those national elections, you get to shape the future of your country. And that's what is completely lacking from the EU.
Joanna, finally, you admit that there's votes in the EU. We voted to go into the EU. We voted to come out. We had votes every 5 years in between. That's a hell of a lot of votes for a quote-unquote undemocratic institution.
Well, those votes were completely meaningless. They were votes that were not about shaping the democratic nature of what went on. They did not allow us, they distanced us from decision makers.
So you don't like the EU because it's undemocratic. We went in by a vote, we came out by a vote, but you're saying it's the wrong type of votes.
The votes that took us in and out were not to do with what goes on within the EU. The vote to go out was a brilliant vote as far as I was concerned, precisely because it took us out. We needed that vote to come out precisely because our votes within the EU were rendered meaningless.
To say you approve of some voting but not other type of voting is, dare I say it, a little undemocratic.
Well, I've got to say, whilst we're all sitting here talking about what's democratic and undemocratic, you guys are sitting there talking still about who should pay for kids' food. I tell you, that conversation, that question has really got the comments in. I've had a viewer getting in touch saying that you are incentivising parental neglect, Nigel, when you suggest that actually if a parent doesn't feed their kid, the school should pick it up. What is the incentive, my viewers are asking then, for the parents to actually do the parenting and feed their children? Other people are saying, well, hang on a second, because I'm childless by choice, so why should I have to pay for other people who some people are saying can't be bothered to feed their children?
All I'm saying is that a child which has got a square meal in its belly when he starts the school day is better at learning than if he hasn't.
And we all agree. So then why aren't we making more of an effort to encourage those parents to do that?
But it's not the fault of the child if the parent doesn't do that.
No, of course not. Of course not. And I think what the question is, and I have to tell you, you guys are really contacting in at the rate of knots about this particular story. So, I mean, we're going a little bit off topic there in terms of what Pope Francis says. But nonetheless, I do always ask what is on your mind. Someone's saying, why don't you run a poll, Michelle? Asking about, I do love a poll, I've got to say, I might do that a different day, asking about who should feed this. Everybody is in agreement. Gordon says, I don't have kids, so why have I got to pay for someone else's? Should I ask people to feed my dogs? That's not really sure about the comparison there.
Well, Gordon, they pay for your road whether you drive down it or not.
Yeah, there's a little bit of a difference there, I've got to say.
They pay for your hospital whether you go every day or not.
Yeah, so, well...
They pay for the police even if you haven't been a victim of crime today.
What are we talking about now?
Taxation.
How have I gone from Pope Francis to talking about who pays for the roads on which we drive? This is what I like about Dewbs & Co. You get it out there, what's on your mind. So what are you saying, Peter?
Gordon's point was, oh, if I don't use it, I'm not paying for it. But that applies to everything that tax funding goes for. So most of us, all being well, we don't go to the doctor every day or we don't go on a train every day. Tax pays for a hell of a lot of stuff, and the idea that you just slice it and dice it for these things you're not using, it just doesn't stack up. Because first of all, you want to invest...
So where do you draw the line then? So if you choose to have a child, surely, as a parent, to be a good parent, you should feed the child. Are you saying basically everyone else should feed the child and you don't have to?
Of course I'm not. That's ludicrous. No one's saying that. Nigel's point was about a safety net. Yeah. Nigel's point was about a safety net. Michelle, everyone from the far left to extreme members of the Tory party would say parents have to feed their children.
Well,
but the welfare state is a safety net.
I can tell you what, viewers, this conversation is not going to end any time soon. We like a little bit of disagreement on this panel, but one thing we all absolutely agree on is that no child should go hungry. That is absolutely for sure. Anyway, that is all we've got time for. Thank you very much for your company. Nigel, Peter, Joanna, thank you for yours too. I'll see you same time tomorrow, 6 o'clock. Until 7 o'clock, have yourselves a very good evening in the meantime.
It's time to remind ourselves there's always another winter. Canary Islands sponsors the weather.
Hello again. The worst of Storm Barrow's weather is now easing, but the weather stays unsettled during the next 24 hours with further rain or showers and continued gusty winds in many places. You can see Storm Barrow, a dartboard area of low pressure which deepened rapidly as it made its way across the Atlantic on Monday and the start of Tuesday, now slowing down and gradually filling, so the worst of its impacts will come down in the next 24 hours, but still the potential for some very unsettled weather overnight. Through the evening, 70 to 80 mile per hour wind gusts possible for parts of Wales and to the Bristol Channel as well. It stays windy in the northeast as well, and showers wrapped around that area of low pressure or longer spells of rain with further hill snow for northern England as well as Scotland. So we start off Wednesday very unsettled with that low still in place. The winds will be coming down through the day, but it's going to take a while, so still the potential for gales for South Wales and southwest England, 65 mile per hour wind gusts. And for northeast Scotland, Northern Ireland, parts of western England and Wales, a continuous feed of showers through the day. The weather stays unsettled in many spots. Some drier and brighter interludes towards the east of England, western Scotland, for example. However, all in all, it's an unsettled day. Expect showers, expect gusty winds, and it will feel cool or cold with all of that.